What's up, everybody? Welcome to the episode 4 of PopCast. We're without Mike today, but we got me and Dan, and we're going to do our best. So this week we're going to be talking about the Oscars and talking about the new film from Redmayne Won.
Yeah, we'll be talking about what we do in the shadows. And yeah, it's just going to be us two.
Alright, let's see a clip of what we do in the shadows before we review it.
Let's go! It's been like this the whole time, Deacon, on dishes, and it still hasn't moved in 5 years. You're a cool guy, but you're not pulling your weight in the flat.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that I'm cool.
No, that's not the point, though.
Yeah,
You're missing
no, I
the
know.
point.
Not a flat meeting about how cool you are.
When you get 3 vampires in a flat, obviously there's going to be a lot of tension.
Viago was an 18th century dandy.
Look, a ghost cop. Vladislav is a bit of a pervert.
This is my torture chamber.
Deacon's like the young bad boy of the group.
I'm supposed to pay rent, but I don't.
The trouble with being a vampire is you have to be invited in.
Come into the bar, please. $4 is walking.
Will you invite us in? We need some fresh blood.
Hi, my name is Nick. I've been a vampire for 2 months. My friend Richie's a bouncer. He'll invite us in.
Gentlemen, you are most welcome.
Nick is so much fun.
I'm a vampire.
Such a dick.
Nick, why don't you use the front door?
You want to draw attention to this house,
We've got a whole documentary crew following you around.
You let a vampire hunter into our
I don't
house.
let him in, I just give him my email. He doesn't...
Kill you! I'm already dead!
You will not eat the camera guy, maybe one camera guy.
Trying to take. Use your legs.
Wow.
What the f did he do that for? Hey, that was... Don't swear. What are we?
Werewolves, not werewolves.
So I was honestly, I think it's funny, you texted me the day before what movie we were going to watch, and I didn't know what movie it was actually. So I had heard about this movie vaguely, but I had no expectations. I didn't know it was basically a vampire mockumentary, and I honestly probably had one of the best times I've had all year at the cinema. This is probably the funniest movie I've seen this year. It's honestly the funniest movie I've seen in a really, really, really long time.
Yeah. Okay, so when I texted you, I was like, we're going to see What We Do in the Shadows. And I kind of, you can't communicate this over text message, but I was like, aren't you excited? This should be amazing. Yeah. And you were like, no, but we should probably go see this other movie. I was like, Dan, don't you know that this is going to be the funniest movie of the year?
Well, it's funny because I haven't been keeping up with like the releases, so we've had like these titles that just sound kind of like strange, like Kevin Costner had Black or White. So I thought it was some like just small release, but like when I actually looked it up, I was like, holy crap, like this is a movie we need to watch.
Yeah, and we were lucky because it's only playing at the Music Box. So if you want to go see it, you have to go see it at the Music Box. It'll be out in wider release, I think, in a week.
Yeah.
But, I mean, going to see this at the Music Box was one of the best experiences I've had at the Music Box. It was a packed theater, and I've never seen it that packed. And that theater is huge also, you know. And there was a lot of good energy in the crowd.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was honestly probably one of the best, like, experiences I've had in a theater lately, where the crowd was completely with the movie. Like,
someone argued too with it.
Yeah,
like the laughing got like annoying at points. You know?
Yeah, but like
so much laughing.
But so much of it was genuinely deserved, and like that's what was so refreshing, because we get so many of like, especially like the U.S. or kind of, not to necessarily or insult, you know, American comedies, but we get these movies that kind of feel just like a collection of jokes. Like, you know, Will Ferrell movies like Anchorman, the Adam McKay movies. But this movie actually feels like a cohesive whole. Like, it doesn't feel like, I mean, there's a lot of funny bits, but it actually adds up to one movie that feels really great, and it's a genuinely fun experience.
Yeah, this movie shouldn't work because, first of all, how many times have we seen vampires in the past decade, and how many times have we seen a mockumentary? But then putting them together, it doesn't feel trite, it doesn't feel contrived, it feels totally original and feels really innovative. which is so weird that a found footage mockumentary movie about vampires can be innovative and funny. And this movie just takes the mundane life of a vampire and just finds the comedy in it. And I laughed consistently throughout. Like, there was never any dull moments in this movie. It was fun. It had a lot of heart, which I found was really interesting. Yeah, and I mean, just fantastic appearances from like Rhys Darby, who plays the manager on Flight of the Concords, and he is probably my favorite character on Flight of the Concords. It was nice to see him here.
Yeah, and like I really like that point you brought up in terms of just like on the surface, this movie shouldn't work because we've seen these kind of elements in comedies been done like this decade so many times in terms of, you know, between The Office, Arrested Development, so many TV shows employ this mockumentary format that really isn't fresh anymore. But this movie just finds the right balance between kind of like absurd genre takedown in terms of like just dissecting the idea of vampires and recontextualizing it in a modern environment. And it's just so spot on in how it uses the mockumentary format. Like, I think if you want to make like a mockumentary film, you should watch this film because just the way it's shot, like the execution is so good. And that's also another thing that I was genuinely surprised. Like, there's so many practical effects in this movie.
That was
and there's so many, like
that was a big surprise. That was probably the biggest surprise of the movie. Was how great these special effects were.
No, yeah, totally. And I was generally just like surprised, like some of the bits they were doing, the special effects, like obviously, you know, it's somewhat modest, but it's done really well.
And there are a lot of so this isn't just smart, witty jokes. There's a lot of visual humor and a lot of slapstick humor, which like is kind of it's kind of weird to say that that's refreshing nowadays, but having like a good slapstick comedy is refreshing nowadays because we don't really get that all the time.
Well, no, yeah. Well, I mean, I think what you said, I mean, this movie is very well directed in the sense that, you know, the slapstick is set up very well. It's shot very well. Like, they definitely just the execution in terms of the mockumentary format, like the balance in this movie is just so pitch perfect, and it's really rare to find that in comedies because oftentimes, you know, you watch a lot of comedies and they sometimes feel sloppy because, you know, for better or for worse, a lot of them are just trying to throw jokes at you. And this movie does that a lot, but like almost all of them land.
Yeah,
like
it's
pretty
like
much
an old Mel Gibson movie where there's a gag every 5 seconds.
Yeah,
and they're all working. Like and I mean, they all worked for me. But if some of them weren't working for another person, there's 2 more gags coming up in the subsequent 2 minutes of the film that you're gonna find something that you're gonna love.
Yeah.
And you talked about genre, and I love how this movie skewers every genre of vampire films from Nosferatu to Twilight. It spans all of it.
Even like what you said, like the Lost Boys, like they even make a direct reference to that movie where they're like, we stole this from the Lost Boys.
Yeah.
I just love this movie's just so creative and like, I mean, I've always been a Flight of the Concords fan. And I like the show, but I think this movie made me really just appreciate them as just people to watch out because they really, I feel, with this film are working on a level of comedy that's so hard to find.
Yeah, they have a really awesome offbeat style of comedy that, again, is hard to find nowadays. So check this movie out. It's at the Music Box. It'll be coming wide release soon. It's fantastic. It is a breath of fresh air, and it's only 80 minutes.
Yeah.
Also, a huge incentive to go see this movie. It was only 80 minutes. It was tight. I love this movie. Yeah. So we'll be back talking about the Oscars, talking about the hosting, talking about the speeches. There were a lot of interesting speeches. And then we're going to talk about the awards, who won them and who should have won them. And we'll be right back. What's up, everybody? Now we're going to talk about the Oscars 2014 with Neil Patrick Harris as the host. Daniel, what do you think of the overall Oscars? Just overall thoughts on the Oscars.
I think I had so many, honestly, mixed reactions. To be honest with you, I'm usually really, really accurate with my Oscar predictions. This year, I totally tanked. I thought Boyhood was going to sweep, and that, as we saw, totally did not happen. Birdman just totally demolished, you know, Boyhood. It was kind of depressing sometimes, just because Boyhood is such an achievement. But other than that, I think I definitely liked it. Like, I think there were, even though the show was kind of boring at times, there was lots of memorable moments. And I'm a little bit iffy on Neil Patrick Harris as a host.
All right, let's talk about him. So I think that he did an excellent job. And I know I'm in the minority when I'm saying that. But I think he was not going for easy jokes. He was moving the show along at a nice pace because that show had some ridiculous pacing issues. But that wasn't to the hosts. That was the producers. That was who was constructing the show. That was Skeleton. That was not the host. He was skewering people, and he was not he was not going for the room to love him. Like the room was people thought he bombed because he was bombing in the room, but I don't think he was bombing in general. Like I think his jokes were actually landing. I think a lot of people felt that his performance was weighed down, and I agree a lot by that one bit of the predictions in the briefcase.
Yeah,
that was a huge part of his bit. You know, that was a huge part of his. He came in and out with that bit, and that really sucked a lot of the energy out of the room. And I think people, first of all, put too much emphasis on that part of the show because I don't think it was that big a deal.
I was personally annoyed by it.
I felt the same way. Yeah.
And I think it was just like the placement of it too, because it wasn't a very good bit at the beginning of the show, and then the fact is like the show was starting to run long, it was starting to get boring. Octavia Spencer just seemed kind of just like awkward about it, and just like she didn't seem to really be game about it.
I don't think she was in on the joke.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the speeches.
Yeah.
And what was your favorite speech of the night before we get into it?
I think there were a lot of really interesting speeches. I don't know if I liked all of them.
Yeah. Interesting's the word.
But there are definitely a couple of really big standouts. I actually think for me, right off the top of the head, I think Patricia Arquette's speech was for me the standout. And I think in retrospect, the fact that it's the only win Boyhood got makes it stand out for me because it's the only chance we got to see Boyhood represented on stage. And I think even though it was a little unfocused, like what she had to say in terms of, you know,
wage inequality.
Yeah, wage inequality. And I mean, it's important. And I think who doesn't like Patricia Arquette? She's such a sincere person. Like, I mean, that's honestly probably been one of the best narratives this award season, is just seeing her sweep all these awards.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you. Okay, let me preface this by wage inequality. Of course, I'm on board. But also, it felt like a little bit like she was preaching to the choir, right? Whoever's watching the Oscars is all for her cause. Like, they're all on board. She's preaching to the choir. It didn't come from the heart to me. Like, if she made it more human, she added a human element. Like, she mentioned her mother going through something or herself going through something. It just felt so disconnected. And when faced up against like a J.K. Simmons speech or a Graham Morse speech,
I mean, yeah, Grant Morris was probably one of the most emotional speeches of the night.
And it just felt so disjointed that it just felt so random. It came out of nowhere. It was jarring. I mean, obviously, great. Great for her. That's like, to get up on that stage and do that is really bold and awesome. But also, I can't help but think she's preaching to the choir.
No, I mean, I definitely agree with that speech that I felt it was slightly disjointed, but I feel like all her speeches have been slightly disjointed this award season. But, I mean, I guess for me, I found that endearing. Like, I kind of like how she seems... I agree, like, I definitely do think when we brought up Grant Morris, or even some of Iñárritu's speeches, they felt a lot more structured and concise, but I just like the sincerity of her speeches. Like, she's definitely very just honest about what she's saying.
Yeah. And when you look back at the past Academy Awards and what are the most memorable speeches, they're always the ones that it felt like they didn't prepare because they didn't know they were going to win. And also the ones that just come from the heart. You know, like J.K. Simmons was my favorite speech of the night. It was just so sweet and such a great way to start the show off. And then my favorite one of all time is Cuba Gooding Jr. And you can't get more from the heart than that speech. And I think Arquette's, while for a good cause, felt a little...
No, yeah. I mean, I definitely agree in the sense I don't think it's as memorable as those speeches. It definitely doesn't have, like, that sense of just, like when you watch Cuba Gooding Jr.'s, like, win, like, it's almost iconic because he's so excited and it's just, like, this crazy burst of energy. And it's definitely not to that level. I mean, I do think probably when people look back at these Oscars, they're probably going to be looking more at, Grant Morris that we brought up a lot. Maybe some of Iñárritu's speeches.
Mm-hmm. The Ida director.
Yeah.
By the way, just ignoring the orchestra, just completely ignoring them. I don't even think they were in the room. The orchestra wasn't in the room. They were in a separate room.
Yeah.
Which I felt contributed to a lot of the, especially smaller awards, the recipients were just ignoring the theme music to rush them off the stage.
But I guess on that point, in terms of like speeches and presentations, what did you feel about some of the Selma performance? Because there's been a somewhat, I wouldn't say completely divisive reaction to it, but like in terms of like, how did you feel about the reaction of the Academy seeing that? Because even though I thought it was a great moment, the Selma performance was great, I'm totally behind it. there was kind of like a slight awkwardness for me seeing just like how emotional some of the Academy members got. Obviously, you know, with the way we watch it, you know, it's really easy to manipulate cameras and stuff to give a certain emotional reading, but it felt a little insincere to me.
I agree.
Even though I loved, like, the song and the performance was great. Like, it was really well done. And Selma deserves it, but...
Yeah, I agree. That whole moment felt odd. Because it felt like outside of the show, you know?
Yeah.
And it felt like they had already won. Because they basically did. It would have been crazy if they didn't win after that performance. It was basically a victory lap performance. Personally, I was a big fan of Everything Is Awesome. Like, that was the best performance of the night for me. But yeah, the Chris Pine thing was weird.
Yeah.
That was weird. I mean, there was a lot of weird reactions in the audience that night. And the at the beginning of that moment was Terrence Howard crying at the Imitation Game, but I think that he actually meant to cry at Selma, but he forgot that the Imitation Game was going first. So that, like, kind of started it off weird, and then Chris Pine kind of ended it. So let's just talk about the awards. Let's talk about the big ones, and then we'll end the show. So let's start with Best Director. So Inarritu won. You think he deserved it?
I think he's a very deserving candidate. I think it's the best way to put it for me. When we did our top 10 list, Birdman was my favorite film of the year. So I obviously didn't have an issue with him winning the award. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little shocked and really sad that Linklater didn't win. Just because it felt like, you know, the Oscars are kind of like this weird political kind of thing where it's just all this campaigning and all like this awards BS that people have to do to win Oscars. And I mean, Boyhood seemed like the anomaly to that, where it was just like this film that people respected so much, that were so in love with the vision, the ambition behind it, that it kind of seemed to sidestep all like that awards kind of tomfoolery. But then it came all crashing down on Oscars night. And it's just disappointing because even though I love Birdman, and even though I think it's Inarritu's greatest film and his achievement as a filmmaker, you could say the same thing about Boyhood. And Richard Linklater has 3 or 4 masterpieces in his filmography that to back that up. So it's just really sad because it seemed like the perfect way to award Linklater, and they kind of maybe botched it. I mean, I wouldn't say they botched it because I think Inarritu is deserving in his own right, but...
Yeah. I have a lot more issues with Birdman. It was still on my top 10 list. I think it was like number 9. But I still have a lot more issues, and I think those issues stem from the directing. So I truly didn't think he deserved it over Linklater. I think he deserved it over all the other nominees, and the fact that DuVernay wasn't in there, the fact that Fincher wasn't in there, it kind of sucked a lot of this sentimentality of that award. It just it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like it was going up against the greats. It felt like it was okay. He was up against Linklater, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you put DuVernay and you put Fincher in there, it would have been a lot closer race.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so let's go to Best Actor, or as a lot of people are saying, Most Actor. And Eddie Redmayne won. So that was probably the biggest disappointment of the night for me. I am a huge... I hate The Theory of Everything. Let's just say it that much. That movie...
We talked a lot about this.
Yeah, it doesn't deserve to be hated. It's not that bad. I know it's not that bad, but the fact that it's trouncing movies that are 10 times ahead, like, just better than that film, that it's just frustrating. And I think his performance is not... It's not noteworthy to me. It is physicality, but it's also a lot of makeup, and it's also a lot of put him in a wheelchair, and it's also a lot of Felicity Jones, who I think does deserve the nomination.
This is the kind of movie that's made to win Oscars. Like, The Theory of Everything is kind of the idea of classic Oscar bait, like this cinema of quality idea. This movie that's just completely made and marketed and released to win Oscars.
Yeah, and it's so obvious the entire night that it didn't deserve to be there.
Yeah, and especially, you know, regardless of what you think about Birdman, like, what you can say about that movie is that it does feel like an artistic point of view, even if you don't necessarily agree with what its thesis is as a film. Like, that movie feels like someone made this with a passion, with a vision, whereas Theory of Everything is just like Harvey Weinstein or whoever, you know, wanted to win some Oscars, so let's make this movie. I mean, it's total biopic fare.
Yeah. So I just wanted to see Michael Keaton's speech.
Yeah.
And I think I'm along with America when I say that. Like, I think everybody just wanted to see his speech. And he got a moment at the end, and he killed it in a Keaton fashion.
Yeah.
Saying that, oh, who am I kidding? I'm just happy to be here. And that would have been great in the Best Actor's speech, but he never really got there.
Yeah, and that was generally, it's sad because as much as I love Birdman and I was happy that it won all these awards, I was very disappointed. And like, I, personally speaking, would have traded the Best Director win for Keaton winning, just because I think this is such a deserving achievement for him. And it's really just like the perfect role for him in his career, and the fact that he didn't get his due for like a movie that's just mediocre. And even though Eddie Redmayne's fine in the film, I don't think it's the same depth.
Yeah, I really don't think it is. I don't even think it's close. And when you compare it to the Best Actress, which we'll move on to now, for a Lifetime Achievement Award, why not just give it to Keaton the same way that they gave it to Moore?
Yeah, and the thing about Birdman is it is like the perfect mix of the Oscar narrative of giving someone a career achievement award, and it's actually deserving. It's not like when they gave Paul Newman an Oscar for a movie for The Color of Money, which is an okay movie, but it's not. When we think about classic, iconic Paul Newman movies, like that's not what we think of. Like this is a movie, when you look back at Michael Keaton's career, that people are gonna look on and say, like, this is, if you want to see Michael Keaton, you need to watch Birdman.
Yeah, you need to watch Birdman, and you need to watch Batman.
Yeah,
and that's it.
Yeah.
All right.
And people probably won't say that about Julianne Moore.
Yeah.
You need to watch Still Alice.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just round it out with Best Picture. Obviously, we talked about it. Birdman won. So, what do you think? What do you think?
I mean, I loved it, and I loved Iñárritu's speech at the end.
Okay. I wanted Boyhood to win, obviously, or Whiplash. But, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, not winning an Oscar actually is pretty good for your career.
Yeah.
If you look back on it, so.
Yeah, I mean, and we're already seeing all the backlash Birdman is getting.
Yeah, but you know me, I've had this backlash of Birdman before the nominations even came out.
Yeah.
So, let's just put that on record.
You were ahead of the curve.
I was ahead of the times. All right. So, thank you. That was our discussion of the Oscars, and we'll be back next week, hopefully with Mike.
Yeah.
And we'll be reviewing a movie, and then we'll do our recommendations. And speaking of recommendations, they're coming up next. We'll be right back. What's up, everybody? Now we're going to do our weekly recommendations. I'll start off. So I just got this beautiful machine, the Wii U, and it has a huge, deep library of all the old Nintendo games and some of the new games that have been coming out. And I just started playing Shovel Knight. This is about like 3 weeks ago I started playing Shovel Knight. But that's all I do now is play Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight is about a knight with a shovel, and he goes to find his princess. And if you like Mega Man, this game is exactly for you. And I grew up playing Mega Man. And this game is challenging, it's beautiful, and the music is amazing. It's addicting. It has this weird art style that kind of reminds you of the old 8-bit era, and then kind of bringing you into the new wave of all these indie games. And it's a really, really impressive game. It won Best Game of the Year from all these websites last year. So if you know anything about video games, you know Shovel Knight, and you know that I'm about 2 months too late on this one. But yeah, that's all I've been playing. So that's a really just amazing game.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm years late on video games. I'm so behind. I feel awful.
I mean, PlayStation All-Stars. That's all you need.
Yeah.
That's all you need. That's all you do. You don't need to play any of the new games, allowing you to have PlayStation All-Stars.
Yeah, it's pretty sad how much me and my roommates play that game.
Yeah.
It gets to extreme lengths.
Yeah.
Although we've been taking breaks more now, so
that's good.
But I have my recommendations of the week. I have a couple of recommendations. I've brought this up before, but I think it deserves to be brought up again just because it's so good. Better Call Saul is honestly probably one of my favorite shows on TV already. It's only been on for 4 weeks. And I'm just genuinely surprised by this show. It's not even that I thought the show was going to be bad, but you have to be realistic when it's a spin-off show, especially if it's such an iconic show. You have to temper your expectations, and the fact that it's been able to really match those expectations while also kind of developing its own voice and style, like, it's really incredible.
Better Call Saul hooked me faster than Breaking Bad did. Breaking Bad took 3 episodes. Better Call Saul took 1.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because I have the baggage of Breaking Bad and I bring all of those memories with me and all that, experience. But man, Better Call Saul is just really, really impressive.
But to the show's credit, like the way it uses like your knowledge of Breaking Bad is really smart for a spin-off. Like you can feel like in some ways, like, he's taking all the stylistic tics that he's learned on Breaking Bad in terms of, like, the visual style.
Not
the film
plotting. It's all about tone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just, like, the filmmaking, just, like, his filmmaking polishes. Like, there's so much polish on Better Call Saul, and it's really, I'd really put it up there, like, in terms of, like, the idea of, you know, cinema being on the equal as television. Like, this show, in terms of the production values, is up there. Like, there's so much polish on display. It's absolutely just, like, a wonderful, wonderful show.
Yeah, I agree.
And actually, just finally, the last thing I would like to recommend is I saw John Luca Dart's Weekend at the Gene Siskel this week, which kind of
Weekend?
Yeah.
Is that the one that it'll randomly cut like Weekend in the middle of the film?
Sometimes.
Like just Weekend will just show up.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that.
Well, it's the one with like that crazy like 20-minute shot.
The 20-minute shot of the traffic?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah.
That was a good scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen this, yeah.
And the movie, like a lot of, you know, Godard stuff, is kind of about crushing the idea of film and really like putting film at its bare essentials in terms of like what it is as a form of communication, as a form of expression. And it's definitely at the point of his career where he was starting to go in kind of his full radical mode. Like the last third of this film really turns into a political statement where it's just a bunch of
The ending of this film is absurd.
Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, that concludes episode 4 of PopCast, and we'll see you next week. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Hopefully, Mike will be here. Follow us on Twitter at PopCastDePaul, and listen to our radio show at radio.depaul.edu on Fridays at 7 p.m. And yeah, just subscribe here. Our Twitter is right here, and then Mike's face is right here. All right, I'm giving you a challenge. Yeah. All right, we'll see you guys later.